Hi, and welcome to the Always Evolving podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Elizabeth Fedrick. While some people believe that grief is only experienced after a death, you can actually experience grief after any loss, including a death, but also divorce, a breakup, hopes, dreams, whatever the case. Grief is a really nuanced and unique experience that occurs when you lose someone or something that was important to you. And joining us today is Ashley Olivia Nelson, a grief specialist. Ashley is here to help provide some valuable insights on navigating the complexities of life following a loss.
It's okay that we don't have it all figured out. We're all just taking it a day at a time. This is Always Evolving with Dr. Liz.
Hi, Ashley. Welcome to the Always Evolving podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Yes, thank you for being here. I am excited to get into this topic today. It is a very important topic that is often very misunderstood. Before we do that, though, tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so my name is Ashley Nelson. I am an approved internal family system practitioner. So I'm a non-clinician, but a practitioner, and I specialize in grief. So helping people really get through and navigate all things death, loss, dying, and really any type of loss, because grief is not only attached to when somebody passes.
Yeah, which is one of the most common misconceptions around grief, that there's a lot of things that we grieve that we don't even realize. We grieve the hope of something, or the plans for the future, breakups, relationships. There's so much that we can experience grief over. And today we're going to talk about grief over the loss of a relationship. What does that look like? What are some of, when somebody comes to you for that type of grief, where do you even start with that?
Yeah, it's tricky because it depends on everybody, but overall there's some commonalities. Is one, we just grieve the attachment, because all grief means is that we were attached to something and we lost it. Whether it was a great relationship and that turned sour, where we didn't expect it, where there's something where we're like, I kind of knew, I saw the red flags and I bypassed them. It's also like the disbelief of, wow, how did I get here? Or why did I pass those red flags? Why didn't I take more caution? It's also the feelings of just, wow, having the habit of the person and just the yearning and the longing for them. Even if it's not so much that I want to talk to them and be with that person again, it's just that I got used to talking to them throughout the day and texting them and then being my go-to person for stuff. It's really just sitting with the loss again of that attachment that we've really become connected to.
And I think that a lot of people get confused with grief when they're still yearning for the person, as you're describing, or maybe even the breakup was their decision. And so it's this thought of like, well, I don't have the right to be sad, or I don't have the right to be in a state of grief over something that I chose. How do you kind of work to shift that perspective? Because I'm sure you see that of people even struggling with, am I even supposed to be grieving this, or is this okay?
Right. And first, we just acknowledge that part, because a lot of times we have a feeling, especially when we're the one who initiated the breakup, right? Like, right. I'm the one who decided this thing. I'm the one who filed the divorce papers. Why am I grieving, and do I even have the right to? So first, we just rewind back and we just acknowledge that this is how you're feeling and it's okay. Like, this is your normal, natural human process, as I like to say often. Congratulations on being human. Like, just because the relationship didn't turn out the way that you would have hoped that it would have, doesn't mean that you get to grieve it too. We can grieve something that wasn't supportive of our relationship, or just grieving the idea of what we wanted something to be. So we just sit in that, acknowledge it, and then once we kind of normalize that, like, yeah, this person meant something to you, then it would make sense that not having them anymore does cause some type of pain or discomfort or some natural shift in your day-to-day dynamics. It goes, oh, okay, that makes sense. So just kind of normalizing the emotional, thought, and even physical body process, because that's so important. A lot of times we just take the emotion and we want to shove it away or criticize ourselves for even feeling it.
And is the process of grief, does that look similar regardless of what someone is grieving? Or how do you even normalize the grief process for a client that you're working with? Because I hear that a lot. Clients will be like, what does it even mean to grieve? What does that look like? How am I supposed to grieve something? what does it look like?
Yeah, I always say that however grief shows up in your body, whether it is anger, yelling, disbelief, being skeptical, whether you feel really numb or frozen or anxious, I'm like, if you were feeling it in relationship to this thing not being there or this person not being there, it's normal. It's how your body reacts. It's almost like, if you walking down the grocery store aisle and somebody hits your foot with a grocery cart. Some people might be like, wow, you really did that. Look where you're going. And some of us might be like, hey, I've done it before. Whatever reaction you have is going to be natural. So when you have that breakup, when you have that divorce, just normalizing that you're not doing it wrong. It's just that's the way that you're processing it, and is learning how to process it in a way that doesn't feel so overwhelming and exhausting.
Do you see your clients get stuck in the grief process where it turns maybe into this chronic or this ongoing perpetuated state of being? How do you kind of weed through that of what, because there is no timeline when it comes to grief, right? It looks different for everyone. But at what point is it like, okay, maybe we need to pivot with the approach or something more is needed?
So generally it's when people are feeling extremely overwhelmed or having a deep level of exhaustion, because grief is tiring. Especially when we think of really intimate relationships, especially when we see people are going through long-term relationships and divorces, like you maybe have shared finances and children and homes, and you're embedding all your decisions in alignment with this person. So now having the absence of them, even if you're like hip hip hooray, like I'm so excited, like I'm out of this toxic relationship, I can do all my stuff, it's still the physical absence. So when they feel stuck is looking at, why do you feel stuck? What does it feel like? Oftentimes people say, well, I feel like I should be further along in this process. It's been X amount of time since we've divorced, X amount of time since we've broke up. And I like to start with the question, where should you be? People go, well, I don't know. So many times we tell ourselves that we should be doing something or we should be somewhere. We don't even know what the should looks like. Yeah. So just getting used to saying, well, what should you be doing? Oh, maybe there's no other place that I need to be except here. And just allowing yourself to really, again, be present in that and to feel deeply into that. And to know that it's really okay. Even if you're going through, the grief 2 years later or 5 years later, like you said, there's no timeline for it. It's really just what your body needs. And oftentimes the longer we suppress it and push it away, the more we're going to have that backlash of grief show up in our system in some form or fashion.
Yeah. It sticks around a lot longer when we refuse to acknowledge it. And I know in my own life with grief, it certainly comes in waves. And so it might be, you might go 6 months without thinking about that. And then maybe something reminds you of it or whatever the case. And you just kind of get flooded with the heartache of that. And that doesn't mean that you're stuck in it. It doesn't mean you haven't processed it. It doesn't mean you're not healing. It just, as to your point, means that you're human. And to acknowledge it is a really powerful thing. What are maybe your top 2 tips that you give to somebody? So acknowledging it is so important, normalizing it, taking away the shoulds, but now how are we moving through it? Like, what are we doing to be proactive to get to the other side?
Yeah, it's really asking that part of ourselves, what does it need? So many times we're saying, well, I feel really anxious right now because I broke up from this person. And it's like, what does that part of you need? Sometimes that part of you needs to just know that, you know what, I'm going to be okay without them. Sometimes that part is really anxious because it doesn't have a sense of community. So it's learning how to tap into the friendships that you already have or the family relationships or how to build new ones. Sometimes it's around finances. So learning what you can do to be proactive with your budgeting and your money making. And then also times asking yourself, can I just really feel into it? Asking yourself what you need is really the first step, because until you realize what you need, you can't really go from there. So many times we have all these different emotions and we're saying, okay, well, I'm anxious, and we just go with the panic attack. But actually realizing where it's coming from and what we can do about it is the way that we kind of, again, release some of that overwhelm and exhaustion.
Absolutely. And sometimes that's even asking yourself, like, what is the story I'm telling myself about this? And, I'm never going to find another relationship, or I wasn't good enough for them, or whatever that narrative is that's keeping you stuck in the grief. Sometimes we don't even realize that that's a big part of it. So addressing those stories as well. Ashley, where can people find you? Where can they learn more about you? Social media, online?
Yeah, so I am learning about grief everywhere online except Twitter because my name is too long. So it's Learn About Grief. And you can also find me on my main hub on learningaboutgrief.com. One of my favorite spots is learningaboutgrief.com/comfort for all things free for my newsletter and also ways to contact me.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Ashley, for your insights today. I really appreciate it. And, I'm sure for people grieving, it just gives so much hope. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And thank you all for joining us today on the Always Evolving podcast. We'd really appreciate it if you'd rate, review, and subscribe to help us reach more listeners. And also visit our website, www.evolvecounselingaz.com, to sign up for our newsletter, which is full of helpful mental health tips. Also, come hang out with us on Instagram at evolvecounselingaz.
This is Always Evolving with Dr. Liz.